transform miraculously. The juror alongside Sanford Quinter, Rem Koolhaas, Zaha Hadid, and Bart Lutzma. And tonight's lecture is Federico's first presentation at the AA, first presentation of his work. And it couples well with last night's presentation from Rem, who repeats visits regularly. So it's a nice combination of return visits and new. Federico trained and is a professor at the ETSAM, Escuela Técnica Superior in Madrid, and as a professor in the studio with Iñaki Abalos and Juan Herreros, who teach in diploma school here at the AA. He's also editor, publisher, director of Fisuras, which is a pocket publication that's on sale downstairs in the Triangle Bookshop. And the publication is perhaps valuable for its contribution to bridge office practice and teaching, and blur that quite successfully. The other publications that I think one could familiarize Federico for or recognize, having read them, they're hyper-minimal essays towards a definition of the deep plan and fluctuating plan. And in Madrid, he's in practice with Dolores Palacios. And in their practice, they've had numerous competition entries and very successful in them. Most notably, recently, just about to be complete, is the Opera and Congress Hall in Bilbao, opening very soon, next week apparently. And a hotel in Spain, in Santonia, as well, recently. And currently, there's a lecture hall, children's museum in Valencia, which is an interior of Calatrava design. And I'd like to hand it over to Federico for tonight's lecture. Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Brett and to Musen for inviting me to AA. For me, it's a great honor to stay here and take part in the jury and give this lecture. Well, for me, I think it's the most important lecture that I have give. Well, I'm not going to talk about my project. If after my lecture you are interested, there will be occasion for this. I'm going to talk about architecture and what I find interesting in architecture. I don't want also to talk about theories or making theories criticisms or describe the work of others or explain plans or uses whatever project. I want to take a stance. I'm going to show you a pack of cards with which I can play different games. It contains 6 cards, which I'm going to turn over for you one by one. You will see them illustrated on this screen. No? Like Duchamp, I show you this card. But in the other side of the screen, other images will appear. It will be parallel examples. There are flashes of our work, fragments of projects, ideas, competitions, where we have attempted to express the concepts which I am going to explain it. The overall conclusion I leave to your imagination. Some projects are the Opera House in Bilbao, another Congress Hall in Benidorm, in urban organizations. Well, let's start. I showed you 6 cars. Without scale is one of these cars. Without weight, without form, without plans, without details, and without gestures. So, first, without scale. I often say that I'm interested in object without scale. Scale is the relationship between an object and the chosen measurements which we are considered to be perfectly suitable. These measurements until now were the dimension of human being, height, foot size, etc. From this harmony, a kind of beauty has been derived. It's human being as a measurement of all things. And this proportion of sites will produce unscaled buildings, or in that they took example for the measurement of God, cathedrals, etc. But sites and scale are different things. One thing is suitable size, and another is the existence of comparative relations. The measurements of things are physics and exact. 5 centimeters, 6 meters. Scale is relative and variable. It depends on the roller by which is measured. An harmony or beauty and scale are also different things. But what if it doesn't exist at all? I think there is a similar situation in painting in the relationship between realism and three-dimensional perspective. To think without scale produces the same freedom as painting without using the instrument of perspective depth. All through history, painting has always consisted by representing as perfectly as possible what the eye sees. But painting is an art of two-dimensional, putting colors on a flat surface or on a canvas. Kandinsky makes us aware of this two-dimensional experience. His mates are from the opera in Bilbao. But then it would seem we are limited to abstract painting. Let's look at Monet Water Lily series. I think for me it's a very important painting. There are moments where painters know their tool of thought is flat, but despite this, they don't lose their intention of realistic representation in nature. The lilies are a fine example. Monet is painting the water reflection. The water reflection is a flat surface. And also is painted flowers, but the lily are also flat flowers. An example which is both realistic and abstract painter. So the painter can thinking about two dimensionals without lose their realistic representation. It wasn't until the abstract world re-examined pop-up that this kind of sample was recovered. They painted flags, reflections, posters, flag things and things without scale, but painted in a realistic way. Free of the weight of the instrument of the humanist epoch, painting could lose itself in its own file of experimentation. Architectural objects don't have a scale, or rather they have multiple scales. The scale of the materials, for example, the scale of the building materials, the scale of the site, the scale of the site where they are erected, the scale of near or far. There are buildings which are cities and cities which are designed like buildings. Objects without scale. And why I'm interested about object without scale. I am interested greatly that architecture can have the same properties as bodies without scale. These bodies who the mathematics have been studying, there are two properties. The first is that they don't have a dimension that can be expressed in a whole number. We know that the cube is a three-dimensional, we know that the paper is two-dimensional, but how is the dimensional of this figure? It's 2.7. It's more, there are more volume than the plane, but it's not a cube. That's an interesting thinking. The dimension is found somewhere between the borders of lines and plans, between plans and volumes. They are more suitable for occupying space than the Euclidean equivalents. They are denser than lines without being substantial enough to be drawn on plans like a spongy ball of wool made up of endless legs or bodies made of numerous planes of infinite surface, whose total volume is nothing, like a castle made of cards. In order to represent its volume, fractional numbers are used. The other property, its degree of irregularity, that is to say, its physiognomy, remains constant at diverse scales. The object has the same form and the same structure as an amplified part of itself. As a result, the smaller fragment can arrange it and create the whole body. The difference with other generative groups in living nature is that in fractional objects there is no difference between detail and its consolidation, as they are the same structure. In the absence of existence of scale, we have no way of knowing within the infinite series of amplifications which would be the beginning and the end of the series. Detail and consolidation are the same. So for example, maybe if you know how is the door handle, maybe you know how is the whole building, or how is Berlin, how is the city of Berlin. Maybe it has the same form as a ticket for the Philharmonic of Sharon. Detail and consolidation are the same form. Second car, without form. Why has architecture always had the shape of architecture? Until now, architectural form was responsible for transmitting certain meanings according to established language. Everyone knew this language. Modern architecture also has its linguistic code, form proposed by the pictorial avant-gardists, abstract forms, redeemed from the classical era, geometric forms. Today's form is the domain of the inventive. We invent forms to distinguish ourselves from others. Painters have suffered the same disorienting journey. To enjoy the share of the market, they must offer the public not an interesting pictorial reflection, but a style and way of painting which differentiates them from their contemporaries. Their whole career, therefore, dedicated to the search for pioneering a style that can label with their name. In my house, I have Picasso, or in my city, I have a Foster, for example, in Madrid. But what does architectural consist of when the form does not doesn't transmit content, when it's mute, when it has no interest. What is a form when its content cannot be imagined, when it is but a vague memory? Or what shape is this rock? Or what form does a fish have? I think a work of or architecture is above all an architectural thought. An architectural thought does not have a direct or formal representation. If we describe a project as a cube or a wall that is crossed with a circle, then we are in a wrong track. We should be able to describe it, but we don't yet know what it is like, because the indefinite idea not only concords an image, but also a detail, a site plan, how it's placed on the ground. An architectural without form is one which conserves formal fact as an instrument. It's not an architectural which is if not like it may be that the processing gives way to the form. For example, that's one of my obsession. In Spain, it's very common to see in summer the fields filled with haystack, putting in strange order, one piece in the folding field. When we could contemplate this landscape of bundles of hay, it seemed to us like a work of land art. But I'm not interested if it's being made of an artist directing the position of these bundles sitting up on the top of the hill. I would prefer that this image be a consequence of harvesting, the simple result of machinery without any human interference. Furthermore, when we pile the high stake, the result form is totally dependent upon the individual properties of each one, its density, its compacity. Thus, the edges have a smooth and irregular line that for me is more interesting than if had been made intentionally designed. It could be that the physical image of the object is the presentation of a thought, a word, a formula. The law outside of the object defines the construction of the form and not the gesture of the architect. It could be that architectural objects simply have no form, only technical uses, acting without leaving physical traces of their implements on the sensitive world. It could be that they have a known form, formless forms which have no attendant structural stability. These are phenomena which assume an unstable, movable aspect in transformation. It may be that the form cannot be drawn, is merely the result of a simple construction process or an assembly. It could only result, therefore, during the construction or dictated. And, for example, what is the form of an auditorium? Maybe it's the form like a river, because the people are moving into like water, like a river, or maybe spilling up people. What is the form on an auditorium? Why without form? One of the obvious characteristics of modern architecture is its lack of definition. perhaps better said, the inconsistencies of its definition, as including the initial stage. It also suffers this lack of definition. An architecture whose consists principally of the traditional processes as conductors of a structural architectural cannot resist the alteration of one of these without losing all its identity. An architecture without form allows reform, restoration, the changing of uses, moving the image without obviously altering the form. And as a result, the object remains the same. It can spontaneously absorb additions, subtractions, and technical modifications without upsetting the senses of order. Three cars. The third car. Without weight. If we don't devise the form, we have a weight off our shoulders. The next point is precisely that, without weight. Traditional space has been defined as a vacuum that construction creates. The tectonic condition of a wall transmits the concepts of heaviness, solidity, and the compactness. I like, on the contrary, architecture which suggests lightness and speed. Although heavy or solid materials have been used in its elaboration. Because mass and weight are also different concepts. Let's look briefly at an architectural wall. The evolution can also be applied to the frameworks and roofs. The Roman wall is a thick wall of great mass. Gives way to a massive space. The mass is converted into the negative of the interior volume. The superficial handling of that wall creates conditions of form and scale which control that space. In the Gothic style, the wall is losing mass. The wall becomes higher and more slender, but there is no great change in its interpretation. The cathedral wants to erect itself to the maximum using the minimum materials. Consequently, it also begins to lose density. The wall is stretching, but the space continues to be defined by the interior handling of the walls. It was in the Renaissance when they conceived the wall as an accumulation of layers. The Renaissance wall is an exfoliated wall. The wall that inaugurates Bramante is a wall that creates order without having to rely on its thickness or mass. In the modern wall, all the layers disappear, with the exception of one, the finest one, the glass. It wants to lose material. We have traveled in the history through a tour of masses, from the thickness to the fineness. If we put in a mathematical excess thickness and mass, a curve appears, and this curve tends towards zero. Zero mass and zero thickness. But with the contemporary wall, there is also the beginnings of a changing criteria. It goes back again to constructing a wall out of layers. Each layer of this wall becomes independent and resolves the characteristics, isolation, resistance, etc. It gets a step closer to becoming a modern wall, a light wall of specialized layers. As a result, the wall gains thickness again, but without increasing its mass. This fraction must be resolved with a little material as possible, laminas, isolators, etc., are measured by the centimeter. The specialization of these materials reinforces this disposition even more. Tecnic also helps optimizing panels and sections. In the previous graph, the curve is inverted. From the point 0 mass and 0 thickness, is where it gets interesting, when thickness increase, but without increased mass. When this specialized wall fills with holes like a spongy, it begins to attain a thickness which makes it habitable. Thick walls, space that didn't exist and which for the first time we can use. We can walk through the walls as if we were ghosts. We can take advantage of a space only ever converted in homes for monsters or handbags in Notre Dame. This example can also be seen in the framework, which stop being compact planes which separate, but also the void they contain. This also applies to the roof. The element which articulates the vertical superimposition of space in use is not so much the plane which separates, if not the space it contains within. My reflection begins by relating this band of space of void, which is the space which the same area of the space creates within. I define it as the small cracks in the wall of the contemporary world. Spooky, full of space and habitable, the negative of the Roman wall. It has functions, uses. It is created by folding interior space on themselves, like a puffy, layery cake, the pastry bean model space. We work on the folds on the edge of the section of the free plan. The fold separates and units the interior and the exterior. The line of inflection is the wall, where it concentrates. The folding of space means that an element is superimposed on the work from things very removed in scale, a tap, even a side plane. We have a new strange space without associations. Now I don't see space as an abstract and void with a structural grid inside. It's dense and compact. The structure is implicit. This takes us to the next point. Who defines the space? Well, the next car, without plans. I think it's certainly not a plan. I think the main part of the space being created currently are a consequence of modern space characterized by a free plan. The free plan has a mirror image, the Maison domino. That for me is our evil. Continuous slabs of concrete sustained by a network of identical square pillars of section. It is an infinitive plan that superimposes whatever distribution. Smooth, regular, extensive, and indifferent are words which we can characterize this space, this modern space. The continuity matters more than the fluidity. The pillars have their own artistic or corporeal entity. The space is stripped, reticulately punctuated by that monotonous at first structure. It is a conception of superficial extension of space. because without vertical construction was the extension of this place or the stacking of concrete slab. There would be gaps, stairs, breakage in union, but conceptually there would still be superimposed plans. It resolves all the projections of a space by the extrusion of a single surface. If in classic themes the walls were the monsters, now in the modern space the floors are, that is to say, the free plan. The modern structural skeleton has replaced the construction master walls, vertical plans, towards horizontal framework, solid horizontal planes. The liberty which others have in the past in the laying out of sections, cupolas, superimposed arches, etc., modern architects will now enjoy in their programs, distributions, and formal inventations of the ground plan. Simultaneously, the robustness and rigidity which they denounced in their composition of classical architecture has been transferred to their own sections. A modern section demonstrates an extreme rigidity in the continuous repetition of the extensive horizontal planes. The space has rotated 90 degrees, but maintains the same spatial relations. The freedom of the section has been exchanged for that of horizontals. The free plan lacks deep. Le Corbusier realized this. Therefore, he began to perforate the floors of his projects. Thus, he managed to give them a certain vertical movement by means of voids, double up, triple heights. He attempted to establish spatial continuities which would restore the interior sculptural quality of architecture. Now, I would like to show you some images which have become another of my obsessions. I think that the architectural person, there is a lot of obsession in our mind. So our profession is put these obsessions in a project, in a building. One of mine is this musical scores of contemporary classical music. For me, they have a irresistible attraction. Looks another one. What do I say? A traditional composition has a fixed structure, 5 lines, that's the stave, and some notes going from left to the right. The melody and the rhythm are fixed in this linear structure, but in these others, the linear nature and continuity of times, sounds disappear. There is no narrative constructions. The sounds are materials which are all sound simultaneously. In some cases, it is the performer himself who chooses the order which to play at what moment. In other cases, the score represents not sounds, but gestures or actions to produce dance sounds. But there isn't, I repeat, a continuous and linear construction. All happens in many ways. Let's think of a building as an accumulation of many free plans. Every section has a structure similar to that of a traditional musical score. Accumulation of horizontal planes serves like a ruler paper does for notes to give rhythm to the building. In a building with multiple sections, different uses are not distributed over identical floors. These scores, places in parallel with other type of buildings, represent the difference between distributed space and the space which distributes itself. The first presents an initial abstract plan with a series of laws which divide and delimit it. It is the modern free plan space which we looked at before. In the space I propose, things are distributed in an open space, not flat, according to frequencies, uses, and longitudes. Its organization and conception are estimated simultaneously. Against reticulated and fragmented space, I propose a flowing distribution of space. The rooms are laid out along the length of the volume. The buildings are laid out along the length of the urban space. The section which is distributed supposes the existence of a space which extends over the entire complexity. It before there existed network and structure. Now there exist topologies groups. If before structures existed, now there are fields. If before lines existed, now there are diagonals. Already, the developed space is not a horizontal or vertical or diagonal extension, but is unstable, jumping, palpitating, vibrating within its scales. We replace the voids which interlock with ramps, planes, and escalators which bond. Let's go to the first card. This is without detail. Let's go back to the score that I showed you previously. That is the John Cage score. Now, they led me to think of another kind of architecture. What is to construct? What is to design? Or when is a construction finished? I propose that project must be open. They must be samplings. It's not important to be original. The user constructs the space, and the building dictates the materials. I think that like the musical composition, we only show the ideas and the materials which, in the broadest senses of the word, construct the work. The project can now be resolved with a karate shop. The planification is direct, without narration or melodies. We must be conductors, not composers. Architecture is a verb, and not as a noun. Paraphrasing a poet, the poet said, we don't need thinking poet, we need walking poet. So we don't need thinking architects, we need walking architects. I'm going to tell you an anecdote of disciple and collaborator of Gaudí, Giulio, who demonstrates perfectly what I think our attitude as constructions and project designers should be. It occurred when the two architects were working together on the restoration of the cathedral in Mallorca. It was written by the sacristan in charge of the cathedral, and it relates what is happening with the restoration of the Gothic painting of the short stars. These are the walls which he wrote. I write this sentence in my studio. Of him, Jujol, it is said, though I'm not sure to what degree of truth, that decorating a flat in Barcelona he put any old amount of painting in a theme, threw the contents against the wall, and that the sense was the way of projecting the paint. Forwards, more or less, slanted up and down, etc. I had the occasion of witnessing from a distance part of painting session in Mallorca. Jujol was beside 3 chairs at the back on the pistol side, and Anthony Gaudí was standing on the 7th or 8th lateral chairs. Jujol was applying painting, not with a thin, but with a brush that in times dripped, and often he would ask, "What do you think, Mr. Gaudí?" And Antonio time to time would respond, or quite often without having been asked his opinion, exclaimed, "Good job, fantastic, wonderful," and so on. I am unaware of the events which led to disaster and eventually the departure of Jujol, but blessed is the Lord who stopped him from dirty more wood. It said that these paintings of Jujol would fetch enormous price in times to come. Because of this, the Cabildo wore them as thought they were made of pure gold. It is true that today there are stains of painting unworthy of themselves, for which it is said people pay fortunes for. On the market, anything sells. So, it's fantastic. It's in the beginning of the century, after the LSC, the acid. People must be resolved by 100 ideas with a bucket onto paper, with the same simplicity as Jujol threw paint. And the same goes the materials. We have to resolve details as throwing materials from a high-end bucket. The materials are found at the side. There's no waste time resolving articulations. A window, a glass sheet, screw it. An auditorium, people pile it up or accumulate it. The fewer words, the better. The same liberty helps us to understand a facade or a plan. A garden material like the material of a facade, a physical idea or a chemical one, like the idea of architecture. What is this detail? Wall or a floor? Or the same image I showed before. It is a river or an hall. We don't define an unique reading or a finished interpretation. The word opens and permits, apart from multiple readings, that the superposition of time, if they are produced by piling on, by integrated on the project in a natural form. Histories are piling on or accumulation of histories. Now, we can respond to the question of when a project is finished. We must allow that the architectures continue growing themselves according to the rules we have given them and without our hand. And the last card. Without gesture. We have come to the last characteristic, without gesture. To explain it, I'm going to read another text, and it's text from a Spanish poet, Federico García Lorca. It's a very kindly text. the imagination of man has invented the giants, to whom to attribute the construction of great grottos or enchanted cities. The reality has shown after that these great grottos are made by drops of water, by the pure drops of patent and eternal water. In this case, like in many others, reality wins. For the instinct of the drop of water is more beauty than the hand of a giant. Through conquers imagination in poetry, that is, imagination discovered its own weakness. Imagination was at the logical point of attributing to giants what seemed the work of giants, but the scientific reality, poetic to the extreme, and beyond the bounds of logic, imposed its truth in the pure drops of perennial water, because there is more beauty in a cave being a mysterious within of water, chained and subject to technical laws, that being a caprice of giants which has no more sense that the imagination can give. We want to renounce if the gesture of the artist, the spirit of the giant. For this, I propose following a Buster Keaton example. Buster Keaton falls in love with the girl in this film. The villain of the film, invariably fat, is rejected by her. Right at the start of the film, Buster Keaton and the girl get married. They receive a house as a wedding present. It is a prefabricated house which arrives in pieces of boxes and which takes a week to construct. Now we see Buster Keaton signs the receipt of all the boxes. The villain sees him, wakes his revenge by changing the numbers of the boxes. He wraps off the real number and replaces them with others. Buster Keaton starts to construct the house like an amateur. He follows the assembly instructions. Piece 1 besides piece 2, piece 2 besides piece 3, besides 4, etc. He doesn't know the piece has been mixed up. Nothing's no, something's not right. The pieces seem wrong. He looks astonished, but he never questions the instructions. Faithfully, with perseverance, he continues assembles the house until it becomes more and more obvious that something is amiss. The front doors on the second floor, the windows twisted, and the roofs upside down. And after a week, it's finished. This is the house. Looks strange, but he hasn't changed the assembly process. He hasn't said, I'm changing this bit because then it'll be better. No, he hasn't changed the order. That's becoming an artist who don't respect the rules. He must follow the procedure to the very end, even if we don't like the results or we don't find them attractive. With the same innocent perseverance as Buster Keaton has. This is the character I propose that we become. Are you with me? Thanks.
Anybody have any questions for Federico Soriano? Do you have a microphone?
if everybody has some questions.
Well, I prefer to go to take a beer. Basic.
Maybe I should then not phrase it as a question, but I was very intrigued with the lecture. And, but what I would ask, beyond the question, what interests me in architecture, which was the question raised, and then you give us 6 notions, is can I ask beyond that, why are these particular instances fascinating I'm drawn to them. I'm not expecting this to be answered, but I would want to pose a question. But I'm not sure if you're just happy to be intrigued and see architecture then as this kind of fascinating world and engage. I think there's something else that intrigues me, but I would say what I take and learn from that directly is this method, as I see it, to generate potential ideas, nearly like an idea engine of saying without. The series of things architecture might entail, like all the 6 things you mentioned, whether it's mass, detail, gesture, and then just to use the kind of word of without, kind of just force oneself to come up with. And I'm not sure if all of them are convincing what it means to have an architecture without detail. What I get is certainly a method of generating repertoire and options. And so I appreciate that aspect. I like that, and it could be played further. I wonder if the 6, if there are more in your kind of bag. But it's a curious thing, which I find very productive.
Well, once I began to think about this, I take the ideas of R. Reinhardt, painter, who renews for several items in his painting. He said, no colors, no textures, nothing. And the result is this series of painters painted in black, a square black on a canvas painted also in black. It's impossible to reproduce this kind of painter. So I decided in this epoch that all the people add things or add ideas. Maybe if I write something about renounce, about this kind of things, maybe it's a good start point. And when I have this reflection, I read on the other side the book of Italo Calvino, the 6 proposed for the next century. And there is some relationship between this characteristic that he proposed of language. I read something with these same items that I explained tonight.
Federico, I think it's really stunning work. Really interesting work, and I think the way you're arguing is something I'd like to ask you more also. I was trying to imagine, for example, what ties together the 6 cards. You did something, it's a very interesting technique because you're sort of jumping between things, and so after the lecture is through, I'm going to ask the question, what is it that makes those 6 cards alike in some way?
Well, at the beginning, the first is the first who I wrote because it's much more. The first who I thinking about is scale, and the rest I don't know how I put one beside other. I don't know. The final result is in this lecture because this is the first time who I wrote this things, and even has changed. I don't know if in the computer, I don't know who changed form to weight. But yeah, but now when I read for the first time, I no, that's in a good order. Yeah. I don't know why.
The argument is very interesting. Not just one part to the next, but the left to right, which is a different kind of question to ask. And I think one of the ways I was imagining those 6 parts linking is that your answer over and over again to the question of what is form is a kind of deform. I think there's the reappearance of deformation as the kind of answer of here's what form is. And it's not just in the kind of particular formal qualities of the work, which is really stunning. Some of the spaces and even the very simple kind of plans in which a kind of regular theater is pretty substantially deformed to the point that we couldn't quite tell even if like the eye lines let us see the stage at a moment. The deformation is that far, which also suggests a kind of answer to the question of how can architecture be a verb. There's a kind of operation applied to it. Something has happened. A deformation, which becomes the kind of form today. And the question I have is that you seem to suggest 2 strategies for that. One is a kind of deformation of a platonic, sort of regular classical figure that becomes a sort of smear, and another one like the haystack, which is a use of platonic repeatable thing that in the way it's combined creates this kind of funny shaped big stack. That you're actually, the work seems to be working with both, and I'm wondering if you're conceiving it on those terms.
No, that's what I say is that if the things are necessary to be deformed, not by the rule of the hand of the artist or the architect, by the rules that do impose to the object. So I think it's clear, no? The things maybe can be deformed or it's not important regular or irregular form or something like this. The important is if you can give rules or an idea of the building, and you don't modify this rule because the result is don't like or don't appear than you like, Okay.
I have a comment just maybe on the analogy of the Buster Keaton following rules and coming out with a transformation, clear transformation of following rules. And the description of architecture is usually that which follows some sort of model, paradigm, rule-based way of either generating and documenting. And I was wondering, as I was seeing some of the work, what kind of spatial logic would there be other than that which one would talk? How do you break those rules? But clearly you're breaking some paradigmatic rules, that of the domino house or that of the orthodox minimalism or several others. And I really think that Brett has summarized it quite clearly that there is a shift away from breaking the rules that is not just a recompositional ordering, but it's one that just transforms what that order is into another kind of form. I think that's really quite wonderfully packaged up into still quite coherent work. Thank you very much for the lecture as well for coming to the jury.
Thank you all.